In this episode, we will be discussing California Landlord Right to Enter Rental Property. The California Civil Code, Chapter 2, Section 1954 defines the following circumstances under which a landlord has the right to access the dwelling unit. Lawful reasons for entry. A landlord may enter the dwelling unit only for the following: in case of emergency, to make necessary or agreed repairs, decorations, alterations, or improvements, supply necessary or agreed services, or show the unit to prospective or actual buyers, mortgagees, tenants, workers, or contractors, or to make an inspection to comply with California security deposit laws when the tenant has abandoned or surrendered the premises pursuant to court order for the purposes of the water conservation and submetering provisions of the Civil Code, Section 1954.201, or to comply with the building inspection provisions of the Health and Safety Code, Section 17973, concerning exterior elevated elements and load-bearing components. It is important to note the landlord may not abuse the right of access or use it to harass the tenant. Normal business hours, except in cases of emergency or when the tenant has abandoned or surrendered the premises, entry may not be made during other than normal business hours unless the tenant consents at the time of entry. 24-hour advance notice required. The landlord shall give the tenant reasonable notice in writing of his or her intent to enter and enter only during normal business hours. The notice shall include the date, approximate time, and purpose of entry. It may be personally delivered to the tenant, left with someone of a suitable age and discretion at the premises, or left on, near, or under the usual entry door in a manner in which a reasonable person would discover the notice. 24 hours shall be presumed to be reasonable notice in absence of evidence to the contrary. It is important to note the notice may also be mailed to the tenant. Mailing of the notice at least 6 days prior to an intended entry is presumed reasonable notice in the absence of evidence to the contrary. Showing the property. If the purpose of the entry is to exhibit the dwelling unit to prospective or actual purchasers, the notice may be given orally, in person, or by telephone if the landlord or his or her agent has notified the tenant in writing within 120 days of oral notice that the property is for sale and that the landlord or agent may contact the tenant orally for the purpose described above. Once again, 24 hours is presumed reasonable notice in the absence of evidence to the contrary. The notice shall include the date, approximate time, and purpose of the entry, and at the time of entry, the landlord or agent shall leave written evidence of the entry inside the unit. Maintenance and repairs. The tenant and the landlord may agree orally to an entry to make agreed repairs or supply agreed services. The agreement shall include the date and approximate time of the entry, which shall be within 1 week of the agreement. In this case, the landlord is not required to provide the tenant a written notice. When notice is not required, no notice of entry is required for the following: to respond to an emergency, if the tenant is present and consents to the entry at the time of entry, or if the tenant has abandoned or surrendered the unit. For additional laws and articles, visit AmericanLandlord.com.